Hello, I'm Tolu, aka the Podfather, and I'm the host of What Makes You Tick.
Hello, Podfather. I am Richard Washington. I am the founder of TickTalent. We're delighted to sponsor this week's podcast. Tolu, we have a wonderful guest on from California. It's Taylor Corr. What did you enjoy most about this conversation?
He's just such a lovely human, but also very effective, and he loves emotional intelligence, which you know is very close to my heart. What did you like about this episode?
So I met Taylor when he was in his job search before he joined Samsara, and just instantly really loved this guy's energy. Just huge energy, great values, talked in systems, talked in experience. There was no fluff, but loads of empathy and a load of human connection in the way that he spoke. So I thought it would be a brilliant person for us to get onto the podcast. And I think what people are going to hear from this is someone who's really got a well-established way of thinking and a way of acting and a set of systems that he can plug into businesses to ridiculously uplift their sales team from a mindset point of view, behaviors point of view, and a performance point of view. So there's so much gold in here for anyone who is leading a team and wants that team to excel. I think they're going to love this episode. So without further ado, let's roll the VT.
Taylor, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining.
It is great to be here. I'm excited to chat.
Yeah, me too. I think this is going to be a really, really interesting conversation. So, Taylor, what makes you tick?
Man, when I think about that, I think about the professional setting I'm in. I think about sales. I love a good competition. I love being on the leaderboard. But I also, and one of the reasons I'm in sales leadership, I love helping people where they need to get to go, having those career conversations and seeing especially young salespeople find their groove in their career. That makes me tick.
What are some of your earliest memories of sales?
Oh, man. I was at Bloomberg, first job out of college, and transitioned from a customer success, customer service role into an AE role. And they gave us 1 week of spin selling and then, sent us out into market. And I remember thinking, wow, this is big. This is so professional. I am in a suit. I'm meeting clients. I'm on the road. There was kind of this, I don't know if glamour is the right word, but it was really exciting. I remember being really excited to go represent the company, go be with clients, go be on the road. So that was my first oh, this is cool. I enjoy doing this. This is going to be fun.
And how did you get that job at Bloomberg? Because Bloomberg is one of the global institutions. So what do you think made you get that job there?
It was a combination of things. I think a lot of people can relate in their job searches, folks that and friends of friends and making the right connections at the right time. So they have an entry-level grad program where you hop in and you are on the customer service support line, and you grow eventually into, different support roles. You learn the product and everything. But that initial opportunity came about from a good friend who had graduated the year prior, who was part of that new grad program, thought of me, thankfully. And I've got a number of people like that to thank throughout my career, but helped think of me and get me into that role.
That's amazing. And can you take us on a quick whistle-stop tour through your career?
Sure. So first role that we talked about at Bloomberg, in that customer service success role, moved into a sales role there. So that was a full cycle AE kind of AM hybrid role. After that, so I moved up to Seattle from San Francisco, and actually found my way into recruiting. Spent some time, about a year and a half in recruiting, and then headed back down to San Francisco, became a full cycle AE for an ad tech company called Quantcast. I was there for 10 years, really spent the bulk of my sales career growing from a junior AE into a second line director overseeing mid-market and SMB. Currently, I'm at Samsara in a similar role, second line leader overseeing SMB sales teams, and I've been in the role for 3 months now.
And for those who don't know, tell us a little bit about Samsara.
Yeah, so Samsara is not a company that, it's not consumer facing. So you're probably not going to know of Samsara that much unless you know folks who are working in physical operations, if they own fleets of truck drivers or field operations, think plumber and, yard lawn maintenance, things like that. Anyone who participates in the physical economy, you have trucks or you have warehouse equipment or construction equipment, you might be using Samsara to, our our stock ticker is IoT for Internet of Things. We have physical sensors and hardware and cameras that really connect all the physical operations of these companies to help them understand how to deploy their equipment, how to keep their drivers safer, how to save on fuel, how to make sure folks are following, regulations and laws that are so critical of those industries. So it's a really fascinating industry. It's just not consumer facing, but the impact they have across the B2B landscape is really incredible.
Wow. That sounds awesome. And yeah, it's a company that before kind of checking you out, I'd not really heard of before. So it's really interesting to hear how they have such a wide impact. So if we go back to your time at Quantcast, what made you stay there for 10 years?
It's a really good question. And, it's a unique path, I think, and I do feel fortunate that I was able to be at a company for that long and was continued to find opportunities within a single company. There are a lot of ways to go about a sales career or any professional career. I just so happened to be in an environment where I felt consistently challenged, where leaders, supported me, put me in positions to stretch myself, to take on new responsibilities. And I found new ways to impact the org. So for me, it was, my kind of metric for, hey, should I be sticking around was, hey, are there more things for me to work on, more things for me to learn about, more challenges for me to tackle? Do I feel like I'm growing and still challenged and making an impact? And that answer was consistently yes for a number of years. So, could I have, looked around and maybe bumped my salary at points? Probably. But there were a lot of value I got from being at that one company and taking on increasing responsibility through time.
I think I'm a little bit biased because I was at the same company for 12 years. And I think that you're right. There is something that comes when you've been in that same environment. You know how things work there. You've got that good network. You've got lots of good relationships. And it's something that I always think about is, would you do anything different? So when I think back over my career, I do wonder, should I have left a bit earlier? Should I have done something a little bit different? So how do you feel about that? Do you feel like if you had another go at it, you would do it the same, or would you do something different?
That's a phenomenal question because I didn't have really a career plan going in. I didn't, I was just focused on doing good work. And I've always had the belief in my career, if you're focused on doing really good work and just being a good teammate and a good, partner, that the good opportunities will come internally, right? And that has, luckily, I've had fortunate experiences where that has proved true, where if I'm just going to work really hard in my role, it's going to open up opportunities for me internally. Now, and so I really believe in that mindset, and I think you can go a long way, not necessarily having a specific agenda. Hey, I've got to be a VP of sales by X amount of time, and that might work for some people. It wasn't my thing. It was just like, I'm going to do great work and see where it leads me to. I do think, about 8-9 years in, I did start to feel, there was a little bit of a gut feeling of, hey, are my learning slowing down a little bit? Is this the right environment for me? Should I seek a new opportunity to maybe stretch in a different direction? It's a really hard decision to make when you've been in a company that long. And so if I'm thinking about things I would have done differently, I would have, continued to take that same mindset my whole time there, but maybe listen more to my gut about, hey, when it's time, it's time. And 8-9 years is still a long time to be at a company.
I think that mindset is so important. And when I started my career, I was one of those people who was like, okay, this is what I want to do. This is how I want to do it. And I had this plan. And then I was lucky enough to do a grad scheme where you rotate and you try different things. And I thought I wanted to be in marketing, and I tried it and I sucked at it and I hated it. And then I found data and I was like, I love this. So for me, that's where I shifted from, I have this massive plan, to, okay, I want to be really good at what I do. I want to get paid well and I want to be well respected. Those are my kind of guiding principles. And I love that approach where, like, no matter what you're doing, if you're trying to be as good at it as you can and trying to be the best teammate that you can and be the best partner that you can, the right things will open themselves up for you. So I love that approach.
It's funny, when I was at Bloomberg, because out of that customer service role, there are two different career paths. There is an analyst track where you grow your financial knowledge. You're working internally on different, asset class and stuff. And that, I was like, wow, that seems so sophisticated and such a cool career track. Well, there were some markers to get up down that track. I took a take-home Microsoft Excel test and I failed it. And this was, Google was available, YouTube was available. I failed a take-home Excel test. And it was really a sign, like you're saying with marketing, it just, it was really a sign that, like, I was not meant to sit in a suit and type in Excel all day. Some people excellent at it. It wasn't my path. And you kind of look for those signs early. It's like, you thought this might be a plan, and then it, you get pushed to a different track.
And I really like what you said also about the things that you were asking yourself about if it's time to move on or not. And I think that takes quite a lot of knowing what's important to you. So I don't think there's any like right or wrong way. Like for some reasons, for some people, the thing of, am I getting paid enough is the question that they need to ask themselves. And if you're not, then cool, go jump to something else. I love that you really understood what's important to you. What was the process for you in understanding, okay, this is what I'm going to ask myself when it's time to leave? Was there a plan with that, or is that just how you found yourself naturally thinking?
I've always tried to listen to my gut in a lot of ways, which sounds, it sounds like a cop out, but you're absolutely right. You got to know what's important to you. And for me, and I've worked with so many different sales people over the years and led so many different salespeople that had such different motivations. And for some folks, the salary was just a number and there were things that were way more important to them. For some folks, rightfully, it was, hey, the salary's got to be here, and I'm really pushing for everything I can get to take home. And I understand both ends of the spectrum completely. So it is kind of almost like a scorecard where it's like, okay, if the salary is here, and what do my life circumstances look like? Because a lot of my priorities changed when I had daughters and thought about, like right now I'm at a company where flexibility is prioritized, and that's really helpful for me having a 1 and a 3-year-old and figuring out how to get my role done. So the priorities do shift over time in terms of, I was young, I was chasing, I want those quarterly sales awards, I want that promotion, I want to be recognized, and that's great, and that's fine. There's nothing better or worse than these different motivations.
Yeah.
But it was kind of listening to myself and understanding how those motivations changed. There was a point where, when I shifted into sales leadership and I realized how far behind I was from a development standpoint, because, as an AE, you're just sharpening your axe, you're working on tools and sales skills, and it can be very individual driven and a focus on skills. Well, then as a manager, I felt so far behind, and all of a sudden development became a huge focal point for me. Hey, is this company helping me develop? Am I being exposed to resources to help grow? Because I'm not really equipped to be a sales manager right now. And there were things around, emotional intelligence and my communication skills and how I related to people that were just not there yet. And so real quickly overnight, okay, salary kind of ticked down a little bit. Now I was like, I really got to grow because I want a career in sales leadership. And there are things I really got to focus on. And that went way high on the list. So every once in a while I was just checking in with that gut, and saying, okay, does this still feel like, how are my metrics changing and what's really important? And am I meeting those thresholds? That was really important to me.
Was there something that happened that made you realize that you weren't as far on the development for the sales leadership side of things?
A couple things. Yeah. And I would encourage anyone who's listening, who's in a leadership role, the more you can source feedback from your teams. I know it can be tough, and sometimes people don't always give you that honest feedback. Creating that two-way dialogue is so valuable. We had at one point a manager survey, probably 3 to 6 months into my first manager role. One of my reps told me that it was my way or the highway. I had one way to coach, and if you didn't do it Taylor's way, it was, he's going to coach you out of it. But the more impactful one, I had another rep who, this will stick with me forever. He said that I was mechanically compassionate, that I, said the right things sometimes, but didn't mean them,
Yeah.
And
Wow.
in the moment, I'm glad I can laugh about it now. In the moment, it really stung, of course, and as good feedback tends to do. But it was so impactful, and I'm so thankful for it because it really kicked off a very defining journey over the next, 7-8 years, or when, however long ago that was, of, wow, okay, here is where I got to, and it read, Brene Brown. I started diving in on emotional intelligence topics. I really took it very seriously, and used a manager journal to measure my progress and everything. And like, it was all based on that feedback. So as much feedback as you can source, it was so valuable for me. And without that, I don't know if I would have been on the same development trajectory.
Did you find it easy to adapt, or was it quite a tough journey to adapt?
In some ways, it was, I think there are bigger changes than others. That change from individual contributor to manager took a much longer adjustment. And I think the things that can help you adapt, it's really quick, early, and often feedback. It is having a manager or a leader or a mentor who can help identify kind of where it's going to be a struggle and a challenge for you. So, that was a big jump for me. Jumping companies was less of a change for me because, sales teams, there's a lot of similarities in kind of how they operate. And it felt, yeah, there's different industry stuff I got to learn, but it's just adapting to some new internal stuff, but applying a lot of the same principles. So I'd say when you are making a, career shift, a role shift, you'll kind of underestimate, I think in my experience is underestimating how much change there's going to be. So seeking out those sources of feedback from, the side, from on top, from below, and figuring out what you need to work on, it gets really important. And so I'm really glad I had that for that first year or two.
And you mentioned that you had some really good leaders and there were some people who helped you. I would love to hear about maybe 2 or 3 of the leaders that you had and what were some of the things that you learned from each of those people that really helped you.
Yeah, I would go back to, I'll start at Robert Half, where I was doing recruiting. Jamie Taylor, my manager at the time, she was an excellent model for leadership for me that I'm very thankful for. She, really, I felt very cared for, and that she would take the bullets from a client or from leadership at the company. There was really that strong loyalty of, wow, this person is putting me first, and taking all the, the bad stuff and the, whatever's coming, blocking out the noise, helping me do my job. It really helped me understand, yes, there's the manager aspect, which is incredibly important. And that leader aspect, I think they're equally important. That's another topic to dive into, but she really embodied that leadership aspect of like, wow, I feel really strongly supported and that my priorities are above hers when it comes to the work day. So that was a really terrific example. She gave me some great, lessons and coaching on professionalism and just, growing in my career. And then when I did become, a manager for the first time, one of my early directors, Maddie Lombard, another, again, fantastic example of leadership. There's I'm forgetting her name, the Radical Candor book. Yeah. There's that care deeply, challenge directly paradigm. And she really embodied that. It was, you always felt like she had your back and cared about you as a person, but she was very much going to challenge you directly and call out things and help you grow and make sure that the focus was on the work and raising the bar and your standards. So those two really stick out at me. Not that there's any specific like coaching session they gave or a speech they delivered. It was just how they went about themselves as leaders that provided me great models to think about, okay, I'm trying to grow as a professional and a leader. Here are 2 examples of folks that I want to try and steal from as I grow.
I love that. And the care deeply, challenge directly makes such a big difference, but it takes a lot of bravery to hold that tension between the 2. You mentioned about the manager versus leader discussion. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that and just kind of wax lyrical about it.
Yeah, of course. I think if you spend enough time on LinkedIn and you see all the memes and stuff and you comparing a leader to a manager and how awful managers are and how wonderful leaders are, the way I've kind of framed it in my mind as I've thought about it a lot is, a high managerial skill level will raise the floor for your team, and a really high leadership capacity raises the ceiling. Because, as a manager, you do need to make sure the trains run on time, that people know what's expected of them day in, day out, that they know the metrics, they have visibility, that you are communicating, what needs to be done on deals. They are, they have a process for reviewing their deals, for getting activity out the door, whatever it may be. All of that operational aspect, that's in the manager bucket for me. You need that to be a really high competency to become a really strong leader. Whenever I'm working with newer managers or just talking through with people about my leadership journey, I feel like you can't be a great leader until the management stuff is really built up for you, because part of being a manager is creating a really strong operational rhythm. Once you have that in place, that's kind of a base or a platform to build from, to then think about, okay, how do I engage with my team? How do I coach them? How do I inspire them? How do I work internally to solve challenges? A lot of getting into more kind of some of these leadership aspects and develop relationships with my team. And I think you need that operational foundation as a manager. So I put them on equal footing because I think they have different impacts for your team, and it's not one is better than the other. I think people do have natural skills where I think more of my natural talents are around being a manager. I like puzzling out and finding, what metrics are working, providing a framework for the team, helping people organize their day, all the details, deal reviews, all that stuff really speaks to me. I've had to do a lot more work on the leader side. Again, neither is worse or better, but I think that's the distinction in kind of how I think about it.
I've never heard it described that way in terms of the floor versus the ceiling, but I think it makes so much sense because a manager sets the standard or the baseline for operational excellence, and then the leader often focuses on the potential side of things. Okay, how do we pull out the potential in each person versus pulling out the potential and setting the standard for the process? I've never thought of it as the floor versus the ceiling, but it just makes so much sense.
Yeah, and I've worked with folks who, are index higher on the leadership side. Their team loves them. They are, really good at connecting with people. They can raise the mood on the floor and inspire folks. But then if the operational rhythm is choppy, it creates a lot of uneven performance across the team. And there's a little more randomness, a little more chance that you don't want in a sales quarter. So I've seen that side of things, which is why I kind of put them together and that, again, on that equal plane.
And so I think you've touched on it a little bit before about some of the leadership things that you had to work on. But outside of what you've mentioned, what are some of the other leadership traits that you had to really work on?
Yeah, I've got one great example, and I'll do a quick plug for, I don't know where I picked this up from, but I started using a manager journal where just at the end of the day, I'd reflect on some of the conversations that I had, some of the interactions that I had internally, what I was working on, and just kind of gave myself a light review of the day. Like, hey, here's things that went well, here's things that didn't. And then I tried to track my progress in certain focus areas. So I mentioned earlier, communication and emotional intelligence being a big piece of that. Emotional intelligence is a really big, broad bucket, and it can feel really difficult to track progress and say, hey, I am improving in that, big world. So there were a few areas that I wanted to focus on really specifically. One of them, I think it's called self-regulation, is the idea that you create more. Let's see if I can explain this best. You try and give yourself more time for a reasoned response versus going with your gut response. So it's creating a little more awareness of your triggers. If you came on and be like, "Wow, you look stupid." My first instinct, I might, try and, react sarcastically or something because I'm in fight or flight mode and I'm just reacting to, the insult versus how do I create that little extra half second where my real brain can take over and I can give you a more measured response. So that was a really fascinating area for me, where using my journal, I could say, hey, you know what? This triggered me today. Well, why did it trigger me? And then I responded like this, but I really wanted to respond like this. And over time, I could feel myself during the day having a little extra awareness, because I'd been tracking it through the journal. Then someone would say something and be like, oh, okay. And, I'd take that extra half beat. So it was really cool getting to see that in action. And I think, so much of your strength as leader comes down to your communications. There's so much that it signals to the team. Your words carry so much weight. If you can pay attention to what's impacting your communication, and for me, it was that self-regulation piece, that went a long way for me, I think, helping to, you're not presenting a fake front. You're just trying to be a little more, considered in your actions and your words.
I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with because they feel like to be authentic, you just have to say what you feel. And I think that that's something that people really struggle with, but it's kind of like me authentically. I want to have good interactions with people. And if I'm going to have good interactions with people, that means I'm going to have to consider how what I'm saying is going to land. That's still being authentic, but it's being like authentically controlled, because being authentic isn't a license to just be a douchebag, right? Like that's not what it's about.
Yeah. It's a really hard line to find, right? There are, where is the line where you overshare, right? Like my team knows that I love Fast and Furious movies, and that that's
there's too many
on the team, and I play
there's too many
college football 25, and there's things that I want people to know about me and that just come up in conversation. Now, there's times would be an overshare if I was like, oh yeah, I took off 2 hours in the morning, just wasn't feeling it, or hey, I get nervous talking to clients, or there's things maybe aren't going to make sense to share with my team. So there is definitely, you can get into that overshare territory, but there's things, so you have to use your best judgment, and you'll maybe learn lessons over time where you do overshare or undershare, and so that part of that does take time and being in a professional setting.
So one of my favorite definitions of emotional intelligence is about emotional intelligence is what happens in the gap between when you're triggered and when you respond. And that's exactly what you're talking about. Taking that time in between when something happens till things come out of your mouth to really consider what my options are. Why am I feeling this way? What do I want to do about how I'm feeling? Why do I want to do that? And what's the outcome going to be?
I love that definition. That is exactly what I've tried to work on. And I think it is so impactful. And what I would say for folks too is it takes time. It takes a lot of intentional work. It takes a lot of time. It's not just, hey, I'm going to employ this tomorrow. It's taken me a long time of really almost every day after work, kind of thinking through, hey, where's areas where I was doing well or not so well in this. You do notice you start to develop an awareness over time, but it's very gradual. So versus, as an AE, you can say, hey, I want to get better at writing emails, and you could employ a tactic tomorrow. This one takes a little more time. It's super valuable work. It's just not going to give you that immediate gratification if that's what you're looking for.
And how did you build that discipline of journaling every day about it? Are you naturally a disciplined person, or is that something you've been working on? Or how did you get yourself to that place where you've been able to do that every day?
Yeah. I've always, as an AE, kind of adopted the mindset that, my calendar is going to dictate my day and it's going to help ensure my success. So, slightly off topic, but, when I showed up to every day as an AE, I already knew this block was for calls. All my calls are laid out and they're already set in the system. So I'm just going to make these calls that yesterday me laid out, and, all the emails ready to go. Hey, you're going to do these X amount of emails. And so anything that I needed to do just got blocked out on the calendar. And in a lot of ways, I adapted that as a manager and just said, okay, like, here's the time. I need to set aside time to get done these certain things. And hey, I'm going to review our forecast on these days. I'm going to do a deal review on these, everything was kind of mapped out. So that was part of it, is carving out those little windows of time. And I made sure to do it right as the day ended. Because if I left it for, say, hey, like at 9 p.m., I'm going to do this before I go to bed, there's stuff going on. I might totally miss that. So it had to be kind of in the moment and when I was still in that work mindset.
And what I would love to dive a little bit more into is, how did you grow in sales? So we've talked quite a bit about leadership. I'd love to understand a little bit more about your journey in terms of becoming a salesperson that grows, that hits target, that is succeeding to the point where you are getting promotions and that kind of thing. So how did you grow your sales skills? Like, what were some of the things that you had to work on?
So, my path was a little different in that, I didn't take the traditional SDR, inbound SDR to outbound to grow into an AE role. I had done, kind of an AE AM hybrid role at Bloomberg that was a little specialized. I'd done the full cycle recruiting role, which was, high volume, a lot of phone calls, kind of quick pace. So I had the building blocks of an AE role, but not that specific experience. So I do feel very fortunate that I was able to hop into an AE role with a great company. And I think a big thing early on was understanding my motivations in how I wanted to succeed. So a big thing for me was being at the top of the leaderboard. When I was at Bloomberg, I wanted to resolve the most customer service complaints. And then when I was at Quantcast and AE, I wanted to be at the top of the dials leaderboard. It just, that naturally spoke to me. I respond to that kind of gamification and that kind of, motivation. And that's different for everybody. I think it's one of the challenges as a manager is tapping into that with your team and figuring out, or manager or leader, figuring out what those motivations are. Some people want to, have more recognition. Some people want cash bonuses. Some people want words of affirmation. There's a whole spectrum there. But for me, I understood that I wanted to be at the top of the leaderboard, and that's what's going to motivate me, right? And so what I noticed early on was that that just led to successful outcomes, And then there were a lot of hard lessons learned early on that I just was forced to embrace because there was no other, way I was going to get around it, So good example, first or second quarter I was there, I closed 12 new logos. I led the org for that particular quarter. It was a great quarter. Well, the next quarter, six of those customers did not renew, and a couple of them didn't even want to pay us, and I got hit with a clawback. Well, okay, that was my only choices were to either do that again next quarter or learn from that and try and build something a little better. So that growth mindset in terms of, hey, I'm going to move really fast, but I'm also going to try and learn from the things that don't go well. As we talked about with my initial manager experiences, that's exactly how I approached the AE role. It was, hey, I need to figure out what's going on here and build and grow from it and rely on my resources internally to develop as an AE. And, I've been fortunate to have strong leaders and strong frontline managers throughout my time that helped me identify what those areas were, learn from some of these misses. So those two things were both really important for me early on.
What was the adjustment that you made specifically in that situation where you had loads of new logos, but then they didn't renew or they didn't want to pay? So what adjustment did you make to remedy that?
Yeah, there's a couple things, and I also put my account management partner in a terrible spot, and those partnerships are so valuable, across the org. And there were a couple things. And one thing I'd point to for any AE, I talk about organization a lot as a huge key to success. Having a really rock solid understanding of your ICP, who, gets the most value from your solutions, what your best customer is at a very specific level, I think is also a huge key to success. So, and part of that lesson is built from these experiences. I needed to find those right types of customers because they were going to be bigger contracts. They're also going to stick around longer. And early on, it was really clear to see, I was like, okay, these people were never going to be a great fit for Quantcast long-term, or even in that quarter, they probably weren't an ideal fit. And that's a lesson, you're an AE, you go through those first, learning series. Maybe it's a video. Maybe someone tells you, hey, here's the industries you sell into. But then when you talk with someone like, yeah, we could buy, it's a very different feeling. And I almost feel like, for an AEs, you almost have to have that really tough lesson. And the earlier you get to that lesson, the better. But I don't know if I would have learned that if someone hadn't have clawed back some of my commissions because I sold a bad deal, So I really learned like, okay, well, yeah, that wasn't the training, but now I'm really going to stick to it because I'm actually feeling the impact of that bad decision. So there was that. There was also, we had sales processes in for a reason around doing kickoff calls and making sure everyone was aligned on what we were delivering. And was I paying the most attention to those early on? Maybe not. I saw dollar signs and I was ready to bring folks in. So feeling like, oh, okay, this is actually a real concrete impact to my reputation internally, to my growth, to my paycheck. That was, okay, expectation setting, adhering to the ICP, two big things that I wanted to focus on.
What I find really interesting is that you still got them over the line, but they weren't quite the right fit. So there was something that you were doing really right in terms of you were still able to get people over the line. And I was just wondering, did you know at the time that maybe you weren't doing the right thing? Or was that only something that came in retrospect?
Mostly retrospect, to be honest. Because I talk about this a lot. I think that's one of the challenges with just sales training in general. It's, I could learn about a new product and then have to sell it tomorrow or sell it a year from now, but I don't have those training materials on hand. Or maybe it's maybe not top of mind for me. So when I probably got the training on our ICP and how to set expectations and stuff, that was maybe part of my onboarding when I was getting going week 1 or 2. And, I was young to pay most attention to that at that age. Probably didn't. So going through, and I think that's one of the challenges as a young sales rep in particular, disqualifying an opportunity. It's like, wait, this person could buy from me. Why do I want to tell them no? Why do I want to disqualify them? It's money I could get. That's a really, really hard lesson. And it's really hard to be like, you know what? They're not quite in the ICP. Even if they want to buy from us, I'm going to tell them, no, not right now. So I don't think I felt like I was doing something wrong. Hey, I'm bringing in business for the company. But if someone had sat me down and actually reviewed it, I probably could have come to that realization, but I wouldn't have on my own.
Slightly random question. What would you say is your sales superpower?
As an AE, I was more proactively organized than anybody on the sales floor. Every day I left as an AE, I had every call and email mapped out for the next day. And so I'd show up to the office at 7 a.m. and have all my cold calls done before anyone else showed up. And all my emails were pretty much scheduled and ready to go. So I almost kind of started every day a half a foot ahead, or because I spent that 20 or 30 minutes at the end of the day mapping out my entire next day so I could be successful. And that discipline to keep myself proactively organized was how I stayed ahead of the pace.
That is so interesting. So you have a picture of Steph Curry in the background. Why Steph Curry?
So I'm a big NBA fan. I grew up in Seattle, so I don't have a team anymore. So I just root for the NBA in general. So I'm not a Warriors fan, but I think the joy that Steph plays with, the impact that he's had, he is just so fun to watch. That I had to capture the greatness, and especially living in the Bay Area now. Steph's so popular here. It just made sense.
And the reason I ask is because the more I listen to you talk, the more similarities I see between you and Steph Curry. And this sounds very odd, but this is what I'm taking from it. Because even what you just said about being organized and being meticulous, like that is Steph Curry to a T. Like his workouts, when you see how he works out, you see the approach he takes, that's it. Being the top of the leaderboard, like that is Steph Curry in a nutshell. He's made the most 3-pointers ever. So like there are so many interesting parallels. So I was just intrigued as to why you chose him, especially because you're not from San Francisco. In America, that's like a big deal, you know?
I would never profess to be a Warriors fan because I moved here right before their championships, and I can't bandwagon myself onto the Warriors.
I don't judge you. You could do what you like. I don't judge you at all. Yeah, but I think there is just something about, I really liked what you said about being organized, and you can just turn up and execute. Like you've made all your preparation. Now you can just turn up and execute. You don't have to make those decisions in the moment. A lot of those decisions are made beforehand and you can just do.
Yeah, 100%.
So Taylor, I wanted to go back to something that you said earlier when I asked you about what makes you tick. And one of the things you said was about developing people. So we've talked a little bit about AE. So I wanted to ask you, what do you think makes for a really good AE and what should they be focusing on developing?
Yeah, so a couple things when I talk with, especially newer AEs are very curious. How do I grow? How do I develop? What do strong AEs look like? A couple things come to mind, and maybe I'm a little biased, but I think that organization to your day is incredibly important. I mean, as AE roles are so complex, you've got inbounding, you've got outbounding, you've got current clients to deal with, you've got in-process deals, internal stuff. Your day gets really hectic. And so having a really strong organizational rhythm is really, really important as an AE. I think really strong AEs have a very strong understanding of their ICP and what a good and a bad deal looks like. Again, I think it's a really tough lesson for young reps, but when they can get to the point where they can disqualify with confidence because they know it's going to save them time in the long run, because they know they can develop pipe to replace what was in there, getting to that point is incredibly important, and selling the right deals to the right people. The third thing I'd add is a really strong focus on a growth mindset, and that especially early in the career, maybe less so for enterprise reps, but if you are an SMB, mid-market rep, you're in those first few years, having that constant focus on what can I learn from, where's my next, path to development, what skills do I need to work on? I think that's incredibly important. And I see that with the most successful AEs, they are really heavily focused on how to continue to grow.
And what are some of the pitfalls that you see for people in that kind of early stage of their career?
Yeah, I think, and this can happen, you get bogged down in some of the weeds and the challenges at an organizational level that distract you from maybe the opportunities ahead of you. And that's easy for me to say as a sales leader, right? Like, I want you to be less distracted by the things that aren't going well. But at and I can't stress this enough, any sales org you join is going to have warts. You're either not going to like the comp plan, you're not going to like one of your cross-functional teams. Oh, legal's too slow here. Oh, this policy doesn't work here. Salesforce doesn't work here. My tools, I don't have enough tools. There's always going to be some set of issues. Not to say you should ignore them. We definitely want to work on those and help that improve that for the reps. But you can see when reps do start to go down kind of that spiral of negativity where, legal screwed me out of this deal. I couldn't close this. If I would have had this tool, if this would have gotten improved. When they start to go down that slippery slope, it is really hard to recover and get back on track. And that's where the disengagement comes from. That's where it becomes really hard to kind of execute in your role because, clients can feel it too. And you're maybe not as enthusiastic and excited about the solution that you're pitching. So that's one big thing. And it's really tough sometimes to avoid that negativity spiral. Having a really great relationship with your manager, talking through some of these challenges is really important. And then I do think that a couple, typically, especially for younger sales reps, a couple years in at a company, they start to feel the itch. What else is out there? Am I in the right spot? And that becomes a big challenge and distraction as well. The biggest thing I would say is that oftentimes, or not oftentimes, but there are plenty of times where I see with reps where they kind of suffer in silence with that. And, I've seen some reps who are very open about it and work through that with a mentor, a manager, a director, someone along those lines who can help add some career clarity for them. I mean, I've had reps come to me and say, hey, I got an offer from Google for this. I'm struggling with it. Or, hey, I'm just not, I don't know what's next for you. I don't know if I'm feeling super engaged. And that takes a lot of courage, but that's the only way that someone like me might be able to help and, maintain that open dialogue. I appreciate the heck out of the bravery it takes for someone to do that with a leader at the company and kind of talk through that. But I think it adds a lot of power internally. It helps you maybe define your internal career path a little more. It then enlists resources for you internally to try and help do whatever we can, especially if you're in good standing, you're a good performer. myself as a leader, and really any good leader, is going to do whatever they can to hold on to you. And that could take many different forms. That could be increased pay, different responsibilities, a different team, but we want to respond and support that. So that can be a big challenge. The communication is the way through there.
And what are some of the potential outcomes from that? Because I think that is it does take a lot of bravery to have that conversation. And you seem like quite a safe pair of hands, if that makes sense. Like, you're someone who will engage with that conversation. Doesn't seem like you'll punish them for that conversation. So I would love to hear, like, what do you think are some of the outcomes, like some of the good outcomes that can come from those conversations, but also some of the bad outcomes that people can be prepared for as well?
Yeah, so I think it does a couple things. For me as a leader, it puts that front and center for me. It's like, okay, John here's what they're feeling. And this is a real situation. Someone came to me and said, hey, I got an offer for Google that's up here. I want to be here. I don't need Google's offer, but I kind of need to be here. That's, but I love what we're doing here. Okay, great. That then for me squarely as a leader, as far as my priority list, I'm thinking, okay, what can I do to get John there, right? That's either we're going to promote him to the mid-market or enterprise team because his pay is going to bump up, or I'm going to go to our CFO and, it depends on your organization, and, try and get him a small bump or a spiff or a bonus for this quarter. That's kind of on my mind. But I'm also thinking about, okay, money might be that main priority, but I know that this rep might need a little more TLC. So maybe that's like, hey, we're going to coach together, or hey, there's other things that they care about. Hey, you wanted to have a mentor in the enterprise team. Great, let's do that. Or hey, you want to be on the road more. Well, let's get you out with clients. Then I'm thinking about stuff on the periphery and ways I can support that rep. We don't like to have, like you're a teacher, you're a coach, you don't have a favorite, but yeah, those top performers, they do get a little more attention in situations like that, right? It also kind of puts on my radar, this person might leave at a certain point. I need to be preparing for that for the team, right? I'm not going to share that with other folks, obviously, like that. And that's where you hope that leaders aren't going to go to, hey, this person's about to leave, or hey, they're having reservations about this role. Because I've had people cross-functionally come to me, hey, this isn't quite working out for me. This is what I'd like to be doing. Oh, okay, great. I'm not going to go to your boss, and I'm sure that does happen in some situations, but here's what I can do, from my perspective to try and help you out and keep an eye out for you. I've even had that happen where, folks have come to me, and then either when I leave my role or they leave their role, then we can kind of be a resource for one another in the career journey. So, helping folks at a prior company to say, hey, or they've left and now they're looking to leave that new org, and you're then a resource for them, and you kind of have an understanding of their motivations and where they want to go. And so that kind of trust and honesty really does build the relationship to a strong point. And then I'm trying to do whatever I can to help them out and retain those folks.
And I think a lot of this hinges on one of the things that you said, is that you have to be a performer. I think people need to get a really good understanding of where they are in that leaderboard. Because if you are at the top of the leaderboard or top X% of the leaderboard, those conversations go very differently than if you're mid, bottom of the leaderboard. Like, it's a very different conversation.
And that's why I always tell people, regardless of your motivation, what you want to do at the company, focus on being excellent at your role, because that opens up doors. That opens up doors internally, externally, especially, and I think the classic example, you talk with a young rep who doesn't know if they want to be, say, a manager or an enterprise rep, or what that next step is. And I always say, great, focus on being a phenomenal SMB rep in this current role. And that will open up doors for you internally. Because a year from now, if you decide, hey, I really want to be a manager, well, great, you're doing a great job in this role, or or an enterprise rep. The doors open up. I remember that with back in the day when I was in junior high and high school, and no idea where I wanted to go to college or what I want to do. My parents were like, okay, well, get good grades, and then that'll open up some doors depending on where you decide you want to go. So it's a similar concept. So I always tell people, excellence in your role, that's where you then get to have more honest, frank discussions, and get to then you have the buy-in from the org for some of the decisions that you want to make.
I can agree more. And so you mentioned that you're a second line manager, and we've talked a little bit about kind of that first line in terms of the AEs and that kind of the younger people. What about for the managers? What are some of the things that you really focus on in terms of developing first time managers?
Yeah, I think this is one of the most under-resourced and underappreciated areas of any organization. I know that at Samsara, at my current org, they're starting to roll out a much more in-depth program for it, which I'm very thankful for. But I think managers kind of get underappreciated because often second leader doesn't have a lot of bandwidth, or isn't maybe equipped to kind of be in that coaching capacity, or the enablement team is really focused on the frontline reps, but not necessarily on the managers, and they can get lost in the shuffle pretty easily. So I think the other real big challenge is it's really hard to measure progress as a manager. As an AE, there are so many numbers to look at, right? You can say, hey, I want to improve my close rate. X to Y. Hey, I want to get better at discovery, so I'm going to use this conversational intelligence software to help me see where I'm getting better at discovery. I want to up my activity. I want to get better at writing emails. I want to look at my reply rate. That's a pretty easy A to B motion. For managers, and like we were talking about earlier with that emotional intelligence journey, it can feel slow, can feel hard to measure, a little ambiguous. So I always work with managers on trying to find an area where they feel like they want to improve. And so good examples, that might be creating a stronger team culture. That might be becoming more data driven, having a stronger operational rhythm. I want to help my team close big deals, I want to be a better deal coach, so on and so forth. So I think first kind of trying to figure that out, which requires, again, a lot of honesty, a lot of digging through the numbers, like, hey, your team, is closing deals at a lower rate than, other folks. Let's dive into that a little more. It might take some coaching like that. So first focusing on those areas and then trying to define those metrics as best as possible. Sometimes it's not easy, right? Like with the emotional intelligence journey, there's no metric that I could put in front of a manager to say, hey, you're progressing. That's more of a subjective conversation we might have monthly or quarterly around those areas. Sometimes it is like, hey, I want to improve my team's conversion rate from 52% to 65 to be in line with the team average. Oh, okay, great. We're going to do X, Y, and Z. Here, we're going to do deal coaching at these times. We're going to, help you forecast and learn to dive into the numbers. And there's some ways we can kind of apply some coaching skills there. I really love manager development because it is more challenging. There's more areas to dive into. There's that subjectivity that makes it more of a back and forth and a real partnership. So that's a really fun element. I would encourage any frontline managers to seek out those resources somewhere. Maybe that is a Harvard Business Review membership and you're diving into a topic every month. Maybe that's a mentor outside of your company. Maybe it's bugging your enablement team to kick off a leadership program. There's so much there that when you first start as a manager, you might not even realize that all these things you got to grow and develop into. So really seeking out and being proactive about that learning journey, because often it's not going to come to you.
And I think that one of the things that is a personal bugbear of mine is that when you're an individual contributor, you are really good at what you do, and then that's when you get promoted. You get promoted because you're good at being an IC, but you've not necessarily had the training that you need to go from an IC to a manager or a leader. And that, I think, is where so many people struggle, because it's very different. The challenges are very different. The behaviors are very different. What made you good as an IC doesn't necessarily make you good as a leader or a manager. I think that, so that's where what you're saying about you need to seek out is really, really important, because it's often not the plan of the organization to get you ready before they put you in the role. It just doesn't work that way.
I think of, there's I don't even know what it's called. It's the competency square or whatever, but you start, you're unconsciously incompetent.
Yes. Yes.
You don't know what you don't know and you're bad at it. And then you are consciously incompetent. You know what you're bad at. Consciously competent, and then unconsciously competent, like you're riding a bike. And I think, so many managers, you start at that unconscious incompetence, same as I was. I had no idea that I was so bad at coaching and, and wasn't compassionate, mechanically compassionate and everything. Wasn't even aware of that. So you have to seek out the feedback. You have to seek out those focus areas and mentors to even uncover what you need to learn from.
I love that. So just as we close, we are going to do our Tickfire questions. Are you ready for that, Taylor?
I'm ready.
Awesome. If you could host a podcast, who would be your first guest?
Nick Saban. I love college football, and he's the first one that comes to mind.
And what do you think that great leaders will be focused on in the next 5 years?
Besides adopting and adapting to AI, I still think the strong focus is going to be on communication and emotional intelligence. That human connection with your team is so important. I think that'll continue to be at the top of the list.
What are the top 3 things that you look for when you're hiring someone?
Growth mindset is a big one. Can they understand, areas where they've grown in the past, how they've grown, the impact that it's had, where they're continuing to focus their growth? That's huge. when I am asking folks questions, and this goes for any interview, anyone in an interview scenario, having a really strong handle on the details and your story. So that's storytelling with details. You get some reps in the interviews who are good storytellers. They don't have any details. Some reps who can rattle off details but don't have the storytelling. I'm really looking for both. And then one thing that I think is really important, explaining complex topics simply. So whether that is a complex industry topic or a product that you have, I'm looking for you to be able to explain it to me like I don't have any idea what it's about. And that's something that's on my list.
Awesome. Love that. And what is your favorite interview question to ask someone and why?
One of the ones that I like off topic is to ask them what was the favorite thing they've learned outside of work lately, and then to ask them a couple follow-on questions. And I'm looking for, do people have that natural curiosity? Can they storytell? Do they light up when they talk about something? Do they have that enthusiasm? And are there things that, they're really excited about, outside of work? It's not a deal breaker question, but I am curious because it does speak a little bit to, do they have that intellectual curiosity? Are they focused on learning and growth? What makes them tick, for lack of a better word there. I think that's a really important one and an interesting, revealing one towards the end of the interview.
I really like that. And last question, at this stage of your career, what defines success for you?
I love that question because, 5-10 years ago, it would have been getting to that next promotion. It would have been, a raise. It would have been, again, a new title and continue to grow in the role. And my priorities have shifted so much over the last 5-10 years. I am, trying to get as many people from my org promoted as possible. I still have that competitive streak. I still want to win. I still want to achieve. But now I'm in a position where I've really consciously chosen to be in SMB sales leadership, where teams are more green. They're all growing and developing. Seeing that impact and seeing the impact on the team and helping people get to those next stages really, really gets me fired up. So that is success for me, is, getting a broad group of folks across the line into their next stage in their careers. That's success right now. That's
a beautiful definition. Taylor, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I've really enjoyed our conversation and I've learned a lot, and I know others will too. So thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. It was wonderful.
Awesome.